Says recording. So
that means we have to unmute if we're going to have a reaction?
Yeah.
Or...
Yeah. Okay. This talk, Art in the Time of Cholera, is named after something that I did in Gdańsk a little while ago, and I hope by now you've all had a chance to receive it and maybe to read it too. Commenting on the book that he wrote, where I took the title, Love in the Time of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez warned the readers not to be seduced into just looking at the lovely romance in the novel, but to look at the very harsh realities that were in the landscape. And I think we're all now facing these harsh realities, no matter what country we're in. There are difficult political situations and much polarization in society. We who work in the arts hope that at least our work will soften these harsh realities, or at least somehow improve them. But please, let's not get seduced. It's going to take hard work, and it's the kind of work that I think none of us, or few of us, have done in the past. Melba LaRose, my partner in this video, and I, like many others around the world, are grieving and very reconnaissant of the work of the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died on the 18th of September. She's also known as RBG. And I'd like to quote from her, and we will quote from her several times. If you want to be a true professional, you will do something outside yourself, something to repair tears in your community, something to make life a little better for people less fortunate than you. That's what I think a meaningful life is, living not for oneself, but for one's community. What is our community? What is less fortunate, and why? What does that mean, less fortunate in what? Where are the tears in our community? And what does outside myself as a professional mean? The opposite of a wall is solidarity. It's building bridges where they've been taken down or where they never even existed. It's breaking down walls brick by brick. RBG's historic accomplishments, not only for women's rights, but all people's rights, were based on her brick by brick building, her ferocious intellect and the ability she had to strategize, her respect for all people, her deep understanding of especially her opponents, and her patience. These were the tools that she used to lessen the harshness of the realities of many, many people. Now, Melba and I have had two really different pathways through our careers in the arts, but we want to share with you a few experiences that helped to shape and still shape our worldviews. So first, Melba, I'd like to ask you to talk about your theater work for, in your term, underserved audiences in the USA and Europe. What were the communities that you were working with? How were you working with them? And above all, why were you working with them?
Well, I think I've always had deep respect for people of all backgrounds, all colors, all, if somebody's different from me, I'm going to seek them out because I want to learn. I want to bridge that gap. We're all human beings here. I'd like to be connected to them. So I've always had undying curiosity and always wanted to know their stories. I formed my company, New York Artists Unlimited, in 1982 as a multicultural nonprofit. So all of our actors are multicultural, our audiences are multicultural. And we take professional theater to underserved audiences. That means we go to seniors and elderly in nursing homes, senior centers, community centers, assisted living centers, disadvantaged children in low-income neighborhoods, low-income schools, rec centers, libraries, immigrants from all different countries in their community centers or their senior centers. And we travel self-contained and take the audience to them with no charge. So there's no restriction, anybody can access the show. And I try to write things, they're perfectly valid, and we performed in big splendiferous theaters, but they're really focused on speaking to the issues and concerns of these people. And so after every show, we have a discussion. And I open the discussion and say, you know, how did you relate to this? We're not here to just critique it like you would in the newspaper. We're here to talk about what came up for you, what was triggered off for you, what memories do you have? How do you relate to this? Do you think we got it right? Tell us if we got it wrong. We're here to communicate with you and make it better. So if we come back to you, it'll be better. If we go on to the next audience, it'll be better. So feel free to be completely open with us. We also go to a lot of universities throughout the Northeast, and I focus in on minority groups. On each campus, I try to connect with minority groups because they have their own budgets and their own audience, so it's built in for us. So Latino organizations, women's organizations, African American studies, whatever. We've gone throughout the Northeast and throughout New York City, of course. All of our shows are non-traditionally cast, race, size, color, ethnicity, size and shape, gender identification, anything that it's the best actor for the part. And I've written more than 20 plays or musicals for the show. I write them, I direct them, sometimes they appear in them. I do try to find heroes from cultures so we can focus in on bringing, because especially immigrant groups need to have their heroes. They're inspired by them, they're impressed by them, they can talk about them, they can read about them. We suggest books we're in libraries, say you can read about this person. And so one of the shows we did was Song of the Simple Truth, El Canto de Julio de Burgos. Julio de Burgos is the national treasure poet of Puerto Rico. She died in 1953 at the age of 39, but was a highly accomplished woman of her time, very independent woman. She lived here, she lived in Cuba, she lived in, of course, Puerto Rico, where she came from. She was of mixed race. And she published 3 books in her lifetime, her short lifetime. She wrote articles, she was a journalist, she was an activist for women's rights, of course, for Puerto Rican independence, secretary of the Nationalist Party, the women's division of the Nationalist Party in Puerto Rico, so worked for independence of Puerto Rico, and other Latino groups, and also civil rights here in the US. So she really is a shero, as we now say. And Latinos make up 18% of our population. They're our biggest minority, even though Julia was not really an immigrant, because Puerto Rico is part of the United States. So was a US citizen. However, they can't vote. So go figure that one out. We also ended up on some spectacular stages, the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, the Hartford Museum in Connecticut, the Here Art Center here, the Julio de Burgos Cultural Center, which we have one in East Harlem, and wonderful stages in universities, just spectacular stages. We also did a show called Voices of the Town, a Vaudeville Salute, which covered the 50+ year history of vaudeville, and showed what it did for immigrants, for African Americans, and for women. In vaudeville, it was like a variety show. It was family entertainment, and there were houses across the United States, so they toured circuits of vaudeville. And we had Chinese acrobats who, they did all their acrobatic work, and they also twirled plates on sticks. And they didn't have to speak English, but they made a fortune in vaudeville. We had Jewish comedians, we had Irish and Italian immigrants who were singers and dancers and comedians. Women had few other options in that time period. So, they were either cooks, or they did the laundry, or they were maids. Some gravitated into prostitution to survive, single women. But in vaudeville, there were no restrictions. They could put together an act and become famous overnight, make a good living. There were also male and female impersonators. And you may know Mae West, our big Hollywood star, the blonde bombshell. She always said that Julian Elting, who was the most famous female impersonator in vaudeville, later became a film star also. She said he was the one who taught her to walk like a sexy woman. We covered all of those, what this did for immigrant populations. But when we were in the Bronx and I opened the discussion, this little girl stood up in the aisle and asked if she could ask something. I said, of course. And she said, immigrants, they're the ones who come here and take our jobs, right? Well, I was stunned. And I said, how old are you? And she said, 7. She was a little sheepish. And all I could think of was the song from South Pacific, Rodgers and Hammerstein's famous musical about you have to be carefully taught. And one of the lyrics in that song is, before you were 6 or 7 or 8, you have to be carefully taught before you were 6 or 7 or 8 to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. So I was sorry to see that this girl already had a wall. So let's pan down and see my shirt, and you'll see I am against walls. I don't believe in walls. So Mary Ann, I've been building bridges between and within communities, mostly in the USA, but you've been working with artists and organizations in the Middle East and North Africa since 1994. Especially in the last few years, you've been working with Syrians and Lebanese. What have you learned about walls and solidarity and collaborative strategizing?
Thank you. Well, Lebanon is a very complex and very divided country. Following their 15 plus years of civil war, a system was devised for them that shared power in society and in the government between Christian, Shia Muslim, and Sunni Muslim. This was supposed to guarantee peace, but in fact, it has made the country very unstable and also has led to a lot of corruption. In addition, there have been waves of migrants coming in, especially because of violence in the neighboring countries. 175,000 Palestinians at the moment in the country, and well over 1 million Syrians, many of them lately since the war. And a lot of Lebanese feel that this is adding to the instability in the country. Now, since October last year, the Lebanon has been just going through one crisis after another. First, there was the October Revolution, where many, especially young people, went to the streets and really demanded an end to the mismanagement of the country, economy and politically. Then there was the crash of the banks and the crash of the economic system. People couldn't get at their money. Now inflation is just crazy and your money doesn't buy anything. Then of course COVID came with the lockdown, and now on the 4th of August, there was this huge explosion in the port where at least 200 people died, 300,000 people are homeless. Everything was destroyed, shops, but also art venues, galleries, the most beautiful museum. Now, during this period, I was kind of embarrassed, really, but I was contracted to undertake a series of interviews with professionals in the arts, including university lecturers. And I was asking them what was the role of art and their vision of the future for it. And I thought, you know, they would just kind of say, oh, don't talk to us now, you know, we can't get into that question. But their resilience was just incredible. All of them, to a person, said unequivocally that they felt more than ever they had to keep going and keep making art for the good of the country, and to join with their other, you know, people in the country, professionals of all different kinds, to call for an end to this confessional system and the rebuilding, its replacement with a system that unifies the country. Well, I can tell you, I've been working there for a long time. And 20 years ago, this would be unthinkable. Everybody was in their own very separate artistic tribes. People did not collaborate. Now they can see, and they are saying, that the only way that they will ever see progress is to unify. And I found that quite moving, really. That rarely happens. But Melba, I'm here because of your t-shirt, because I know that you've been researching for a long time and in many countries, this play about walls.
Mm-hmm.
But your own career in the theater started pretty wild with Andy Warhol and all the avant-garde artists. That was a pretty elite sort of crowd. How on earth did you end up turning to making work with and for audiences who are, let's call them regular people? How did it happen? And is there kind of a red line in your work and in your life that also mirrors some of the things that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has said?
It was an auspicious beginning. I'll say that for it. I was in the New York Times overnight, and suddenly a star of Off Broadway. Andy came, he gave us a quote. For the first time, I wasn't bored. And well, I became a legend in my own mind, but only below 14th Street. So after a few years of doing a lot of this crazy stuff, I began to think there's something more, there's something else I want, and there's something else I have to say. And I discovered the New York Street Theater Caravan, which was really almost a leftist theater company born in the 60s, and very revolutionary, award-winning, Obie award-winning company for sustained excellence in theater. And they toured international festivals, but the main thing was to write things that spoke to people's concerns and caring about the impoverished and disadvantaged and disenfranchised. And so very socially conscious. They even went to the South and registered Black voters in the 60s who had never voted before. They were threatened with shotguns. And they went to the grape pickers in California. Cesar Chavez ended up giving them his flatbed truck so they could keep touring and performing off the back of the truck. They went to jails, they went to shelters, but really dangerous shelters. I went to some of them too. When I joined the company, we had to pass through metal detectors and people were being killed in these shelters. But they ended up they just fell in love with the Caravan because we didn't insult them. And so they would beg to get us back. We did things based on Dostoevsky and all of this. And we didn't insult them, and we would open the floor, of course, to discussions. And these discussions were the best discussions ever. I found the most educated people with most interesting backgrounds, the very literate, very wonderful discussions, powerful discussions that we had with these people. So I fell in love with this kind of work. And so I felt like suddenly I was making a difference in the world. And I moved from that to creating my own company, which followed along those lines, but didn't always go to quite so dangerous places. My current project is called After the Wall. And I've been working on it for years. It's about walls around the world and throughout time, how they got built, how people survived them or not, what we dream will happen if they fall, when they fall, and what really happens. Unfortunately, generally another wall gets built, but at least to bring it up and discuss these walls. It opens in ancient Mesopotamia, travels all around the world. Every scene is a different country, a different wall. And it ends in outer space, where there's the biggest wall of all. We don't really know about that generally, but there is the biggest wall of all in outer space. And who knows what's out there? Funny, I thought that would be our biggest challenge and the biggest threat to people on this planet. So I thought, if we come together on this planet, maybe we can deal with what's out there. But here we are dealing with a microscopic bug. In this project, of course, it's non-traditionally cast, and I have one ensemble that plays all the parts. And it's interesting to see African Americans, Latinos, people from Baltic countries, Asians, and others playing scenes like scenes from the Holocaust. And suddenly, the whole experience gets deeper because you think about their oppression and their culture's oppression, and then there's the Holocaust oppression. And so it really, really intensifies the experience of all these walls. I had this idea 10 years ago, and I just started subtly interviewing people around the world as I went to conferences like the IETM and festivals, toured to festivals, and also, you know, just went, my husband's Brazilian, so I toured a lot around Brazil for pleasure. And I was subtly interviewing people and gathering stories. I talked to everybody everywhere anyway, but this, I had an agenda suddenly, and I was collecting all of these stories. These were people on trains and buses, performing arts people, not performing arts people, old taxi drivers, young t-shirt salesmen, and getting their histories and their experience of walls. Even in Poland, I collected stories. And the whole idea was to start the conversation, get people talking, sharing their history, sharing their feelings, sharing their walls. So as RBG said, the notorious RBG, this is how we come together as a community. So to bring this full circle, in 2018, I presented 2 hours of the project. It's probably going to be 7 hours altogether, but I presented 2 hours of it at Jane Friedman's Howl Happening in the East Village. It's a beautiful gallery and performance space. And Jane is the former manager of Patti Smith and a big fan of mine from the Warhol period. So she was always begging me to take something there. So I took this there. It was a wonderful production. She has a lot of projection screens, so we were able to encircle the audience and put the actors all around them as well, and bring this project to life, at least 2 hours of it. And after the show, I opened the discussion by saying, you know, you like the play, you didn't like the play, let's talk about walls. So people started opening up and talking about their walls. Some they learned about in the project that was presented, and other ones they just brought up on their own. And even including one of my actors who came up with a wall he has, because he's dealing with a mental challenge. And I'd worked with him for months. I didn't even know about this. So it was interesting that that came up in the discussion as well. Which brings me back to another quote I love from notorious RBG. You artists have a fierce responsibility. Our job is to interpret the law. Your job is to interpret human nature. So, as I've been, well, you've really changed your career too, Mary Ann, from supporting arts networking, mobility policy for the contemporary performing arts to supporting artists who are persecuted in their own home countries. So how does this reflect on Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Thanks, Melba. Yeah, a little over 10 years ago, I started hearing about and then eventually started working with artists whose work in the jargon speaks truth to power. So it's challenged and upset a political regime or religious regime or a social group or even big commercial players. And in response, they're persecuted violently, threatened, sometimes they're beaten. They can be arrested, tortured, and I even know some people who were killed. At that time, there was a growing practice of resources for human rights defenders, legal aid, medical aid, and also so-called temporary relocation to a safe haven, so getting them out of the danger and into safety. And some artists started to use that too. Some of these artists, they're called at-risk artists or persecuted artists, were invited to the West for an artist residency and treated as heroes really for their brave, work. However, once they arrived, if they found out that they couldn't go back safely to their country and had to eventually ask for political asylum, the situation changed quite a lot. So in many countries, political asylum or citizenship status takes years and years to be decided. And in that period, also in many countries, the person who's asking for the status can't work, can't gain or earn any money, can't ask any art subsidies, And so they're really stuck without anything to do, which is extremely depressing for them. And although there are a lot of artist-led initiatives who are helping in various ways, I felt that our art sector was not really, on the whole, responding to this. And it made me think a lot about community and about what solidarity might be. You know, other professions like doctors have associations. When a refugee doctor arrives in the country, the association helps them find out what's what, how to do things, where to go, but we don't. And yet I believe that these refugee artists have a lot to teach to the host communities. You know, it's the human face, it's the individual human face of the phenomenon of migration, which is not going to go away. In fact, all the signs point to the fact that due to climate change, conflict, whatsoever, it's going to only increase. So we better get used to it and embrace it and really dive into it. And this seemed to me a tear in our community, if you look at our artistic community. And we seem to still often be prioritizing work that will make us visible or get us better subsidy instead of really acknowledging that we're a community. Maybe COVID has changed that. It might be that COVID has changed that. But we also seem a little bit helpless or hopeless to know how to really do anything to address these terrible polarizational divides in our societies. Now, I don't have any answers either. But it seems to me that when RBG talks about going outside of yourself as a professional, that maybe that means not necessarily thinking who's the next trendy artist I can discover or what's the next show I can premiere in the world, but really looking at who is involved in our wider community. Who is there? Not just my audience, my local, my loyal audience, but what is my community? And how can we, using the power of art, start to try and identify what we care about in common and somehow acknowledge that we care about it in common and also work on it. RBG said, fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that lead others to join you. And I think we can do that in the arts. And I think, once again, I don't have any answers, but I think that's what we absolutely need to do right now. Fight for what we all care about and stop this polarization. Let's hope. Huh? Show your t-shirt. Yeah, right. Got it.